Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of 100 Words or Less, your podcast, my podcast. Technically, it's all of ours, right? I'm producing it, you're consuming it, it's both of ours. Anyways, the guest this week is Mr. Branden Steineckert. He is the drummer for a little band you may have heard called Rancid, the drummer for Rancid. And he also helped form the band The Used. This interview was a long time coming, but I'll tell you more about it in a moment. Let's get some business niceties out of the way. 100wordspodcast.com is your official source for all things this show. Go on the right side of the page. You will be able to find some things to do. Donate to the show. Sign up for the email newsletter that I send out once a week. And I forgot what the third thing is, but yeah, just to do those two things. You know, that's the most important thing right now. So anyways, I've recently been cleaning out a lot of my house because for those of you that are keeping track of what's been happening in my life is that I had a leak and I had to do a lot of remodeling and just basically the house is in disarray. So I needed to clean out some stuff. And so I am getting extremely nostalgic with all of my pack rat tendencies of all of my old band's flyers and all of my, honestly, junk. Most people would look at it and be like, dude, why are you keeping that clipping from your local newspaper that reviewed a show of yours when you were 18 years old? Well, I don't know. Who knows when I'm going to need that in order to feel good about myself? The stuff that I've kept, some of it impresses me as far as like, wow, why did I find relevance in holding on to this wristband of a show I played? Whereas some things are like, oh, of course I keep this thing. Of course I keep this, trophy or certificate of appreciation or something like that. But then there's other things where it's like, dude, what was going on in my mind at the time? Did I feel like I would have an infinite amount of space in my house as I grow up for this stuff? So needless to say, I threw out a lot of stuff, but it's just always interesting when you're going through old things. I don't know if any of you keep like a box. Don't tell my wife this, but I kept like old mixtapes from girls that I gave them to. And when I say old, I didn't actually keep the tape. This is how neurotic I am. So what I would do, say you, the listener, you were a person I was interested in having some sort of relationship with, and we had developed enough of a bond where I was like, you know what? I think music will do the trick. I created a mixtape, and for those of you that are not familiar with the concept of a tape, I joke, but some of you obviously maybe have not seen them. But anyways, what you do is you would kind of run through a list of bands and put some songs on there and, artfully craft it to where by the end of this tape, this person will fall in love with you. I did that a couple times. I mean, I definitely did it far fewer times than maybe one would expect. But I definitely made some tapes. And this is, like I said, this is how neurotic I am. I photocopied them, the actual song titles. And of course, I had to put descriptions on why I'm putting this particular song on the tape for you. So I photocopied those and then I kept those. I think my logic at the time was like, okay, if I'm going to give more than one tape to this specific person, which for the record, my wife received the most amount of mixtapes. I think she received 5 by the time that I realized that she's simply not listening to them anymore. I think my logic was that, okay, I'm going to keep a running record of these so I'm not duplicating myself. Because, sometimes you're like, dude, this song is really, really good. This is kind of the hit. I am 100% going to include the American football never meant song. I'm going to definitely include some other song that just not coming to my mind right now. But anyways, so yeah, that sort of stuff I kept. Needless to say, I threw those old mixtape notes away because I didn't really need to worry about that. My 19-year-old girl I was dating at the time doesn't really necessarily need to worry about me giving her another tape that may have a duplicate song on there. Youth, right? Anyways, but that's not why you're here. You are here to listen to me converse with Branden. And like I said, this interview was a long time coming. This came about because a very old guest of the show, he himself is not old, but a very long ago guest, dive in the archives for this one, Jay Weinberg. Currently, I think it's public knowledge, or maybe this shouldn't be acknowledged, I'm not sure, but he plays in a very large metal band now, I'll say that. But yeah, Jay Weinberg, he basically was almost the moment we were done with our interview, he was like, dude, you need to speak to one of my good friends. And I was like, okay. So he's like, he plays drums for Rancid. Great dude. Crazy life story. I was like, okay. So him and I traded some emails. I wanted to kind of do it in person. And then, because Branden spent some time in LA, needless to say, it never synced up. And then finally I was like, you know what? Screw this. We need to get this on tape. Let's do it over Skype. We can handle it this way. His story is just crazy insane. And he's been able to get through some pretty terrible circumstances and be able to, ultimately do what he loves, which is obviously playing drums. So I will let him do the talking and I will do the asking of questions and you will listen to it. I will talk to you after the jump. Introductory point to kind of, you and your musical projects and what you've done in the past. Cool. I was aware of you prior to Jay mentioning, like, one of the best things about this show is, like, usually after a person is done with an interview, usually like a week later, I hear back from them and they're like, dude, you need to talk to these 3 people. And it's so cool. It's so cool because then it obviously like pulls everything together. But yeah, so immediately after Jay Weinberg and I were done with his interview, he was like, dude, you need to talk to my close friend. And I was like, oh, like that would sound rad. And then, once I started to kind of delve into your story a little bit more, the one thing that struck me, kind of a thread throughout your life, beyond the fact you're obviously a drummer, was the fact that, like, it seemed like you took playing drums seriously. Like, I think a lot of people, including myself, it's like, I mean, I'm a horrible drummer and I never played drums in any bands, fortunately, but the notion is that, when you're obviously a teenager and you're kind of, dicking around with drums, there are a lot of people that just, don't take that very seriously. They just think like, oh, there's no notes, so it's easy to play. But you never struck me as that sort of person in kind of the way that you projected yourself to the outside world. Would you agree with that sentiment, or is that just like a byproduct of you being, a musician now, for lack of a better term?
No, I mean, to me, it's weird because I feel like there's so many, like, I don't know, like there's so many drummer attributes and things that I feel like I'd never fit to, like I always feel like I'm not a very good drummer in the sense of, like, I don't seem to follow, like, the rules, I don't really care about a lot of things. I don't really care about old drummers. I don't really care about current drummers. I don't really, what I mean? Like, it's like, to me, it was like, I'm more like a guy that chases passion, like when something strikes a nerve with me, I just chase it and I love it and I dive in deep. And drums was that for me, where, like, I tried lessons for a couple weeks. It wasn't happening, like I didn't love that at all. And to just, like, play drums with other musicians was what I fell in love with. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't, like, geek out on drums as their own instrument with, like, whatever and subscribe to magazines and, you know what I mean? Like, I just, I didn't care. I cared about the thrill of making music with other people, and the drums were what I liked because I was an angry kid and I got to be, like, a form of violence that was productive, and it was positive. So it was kind of like getting, like, a high, getting, like, some angst out, getting all these things, and I just loved that. It was like my drug, and I needed it. And so I just chased after that because it was sincere. It wasn't like something I felt like I needed to do. It wasn't something, I didn't have a coach or a teacher or a team or anything to rely on. It was just me, and then linking up with other people that were like-minded with their instruments and just destroying shit and seeing what came of it, which usually wasn't anything good.
Yeah. There's something interesting in there. The fact that you identified more particularly with, you loved being, like, creative with people, because there is an isolating element to drumming where it's like a guy I played with in bands for years, like, he immediately comes to mind, where it's like he, unlike you, he was, so impressed by, like Terry Bozzio, where it was like, I remember he fucking took me to a Terry Bozzio concert and it was like, dude, of course it's impressive. The guy has, like, a cajillion drums and he kills it. But there was something that was so, masturbatory about it, where it was like, oh, dude, like, I get you're really good, but, like, that you didn't feel like you're talking about that sort of passion. But so it's cool. It's cool that you identified with the creative nature, and you're just like, well, this is the role that I can play in this creative input.
Yeah, exactly. And like it was interesting because as I learned to play, the drummers that were the most interesting to me were the ones I could like identify with in a way that like, it wasn't that they weren't good. It was in a way that their drums were just absolutely perfect for the music they were playing. You know what I mean? And it didn't mean like over flash and overplaying and all this stuff. Like two of the most influential drummers on me have been, well, I mean, like growing up on like the Rage Against the Machine records, you know what I mean? It's like Brad Wilk on those records was so perfect. And then like Nirvana, you know, Dave Grohl, and like these drums that like you could kind of air drum along to if you're not a drummer, you know, and they were so rad and so perfect, and you can feel like you're playing these beats as a beginner drummer. But then the more you grow and realize like how good they really are, it's like, holy shit, like that is so good because it's so like everything, the way the hi-hat's being struck to like everything about it is just perfect. You know what I mean? And it's not being cluttered by all these extra notes and crap to just flex and, you know, jerk themselves off like how rad they are. It's like, you know what I mean? Like to me, to this day, Dave Grohl is probably my favorite drummer of all time. And I think he's got chops to hang with some of the sickest, but he's never going overboard to trying to prove anything. And what he does is what's best for the song. You know, he takes a songwriter approach to drumming, and I love that. I would much rather like have the most boring drum beat to a song be a part of a great song and have that drum beat be what helps make it great than overplay and have people think I'm like this crazy rad drummer or something and have the song like seem weak. You know, like that's just not interesting to me. Like it's something more the process of not just songwriting but performing as well. Like, you know, I remember like growing up in some of my first bands where my way of thinking and my approach to this hadn't quite set in yet. You know, I was kind of finding my groove as a human as well as a musician, you know, and I was in a band where like everybody, you know, we all thought we had chops and everybody's just like overplaying like crazy every song. And it's like one song's a ska punk song and one's a new metal song and one's like a punk song. You know, we were one of those terrible bands with no identity, and it just was overplaying like crazy on everybody's part. And like you'd get off stage, and if someone told you like, you know, you were a great drummer or you're a great whatever, it was like so rad, like, oh wow, that's awesome, people think I'm good or something. And then after a while I got to a point where it was like started finding a groove, and to me the biggest compliment I ever received was when people started complimenting the band. Like, you guys are a rad band, you know what I mean? And like when you meet people and they're appreciating the songs and the whole group, that was the coolest part, where it was like, no, this isn't about me, you know what I mean? Like, it's not about me at all. This is about creating something.
You felt like you felt like you were doing something right when people were noticing the piece as a whole rather than your sweet fill.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, cool, but that's not what I'm going for here. Like, you know, and to me, it was like drums were like kind of an escape, I guess. I mean, there was so much psychology to me in why I even began playing drums that making it something about just glorifying myself was opposite of what I got into it for.
Yeah,
you know,
that was something I was going to bring up later, but since you mention it now, where it was like, you know, in many of your interviews, you've been honest, obviously, about your father committing suicide when you were young, and then how your solace and what you kind of poured yourself into was the drumming, and how it was obviously it was your form of therapy rather than professional therapy.
Yeah.
I couldn't find any details in regards to obviously and when I say couldn't find, like I was doing some extensive research, but like I wasn't, when your father committed suicide, how old were you?
I was 11.
Okay. So, I mean, like obviously very cognizant of the world around you and aware.
Yeah.
And so was he struggling with depression? Was it alcoholism? Like what was he going through that you were able to glean any information from, obviously, after he committed suicide?
You know, it was weird because up until I was like 10, I assumed I had the same kind of life anybody had, you know, like it just felt like I was this little Mormon kid, just, you know, all smiles, just floating through life and not being liked in elementary school. You know what I mean? It was like, it just felt very normal. This little Mormon family living all over. We were moving constantly, but just because my parents couldn't seem to really keep jobs. But nothing seemed weird. Nothing seemed special. Nothing seemed bad. Nothing seemed, you know, we were, you know, lower middle class, and it just seemed like life. But then, you know, you learn that I was too young to be involved directly, but my father was very abusive, apparently. I didn't realize any of this. And then learning more about him, like, I feel lucky that I was old enough to understand, but I was also young enough that I didn't really get a lot of this stuff I was hearing about. So being like, you know, our family all had to go into all kinds of counseling and things like that. My parents got divorced, and everything happened so quickly. Like, you know, before I know it, there's like, you know, he's not legally allowed to see us, and he's facing jail time and all this stuff. And I'm just being told all of this stuff. Like, oh, everything. I've never even seen my parents fight before, you know. And he just had a lot of demons that, you know, unfortunately, he grew up with and dealt with a lot of abuse growing up too, and he couldn't escape it. And then he had a terrible counselor who just really did him in, you know, and made him feel absolutely terrible about himself. And I mean, last I heard was, you know, when he told my mom and all of us he didn't love any of us. That was pretty heavy, you know?
Yeah, just kind of tracing the timeline. So basically, your parents got separated much earlier, or was like a few years before?
No, this was like months before.
Oh, okay. So this was it was kind of a tempest all happening at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, this was all like, it felt overnight, you know? All of a sudden you're learning something's going on, and dad's leaving, and they're getting a divorce, and it's like the minute you're trying to wrap your head around something and understand what's happening, there was a new development, you know. And I was living in Sandy, Utah at the time. I want to say, I mean, this might have all been while I was 11, within that year even. But I just remember, you know, we were a Mormon family, so like the bishop, you know, of our ward or whatever, him and a cop showed up on our porch, and I answered the door, and they asked for my mom, and I grabbed her, and me and my siblings, they like take her outside, and like I tried to follow her out, and this like cop pushes me back in the house and closes the door. Wow. And even at 11, I'm like, what the fuck? You know?
Yeah,
like,
yeah, for sure.
So I go tell my siblings, I'm like, guys, like there's a cop and our bishop on the porch, which our bishop actually worked for the sheriff's department. And the bishop, whatever, that's like the kind of leader of your...
Yeah, the priest of a church.
Yeah, exactly. That's the Mormon version. But this guy was great. You know, he was like a sheriff or something, I remember, and they had been really looking out for us. Like, we were a struggling family and very poor at the time, and you know, my mom was very quickly a single mother and trying to work and provide, and it wasn't happening. And but anyway, I remember telling my family, and me and my brothers ran around to the side of the house to try to like eavesdrop and see if we could hear anything. And we honestly, we thought our mom was getting arrested for writing bad checks, was
Wow.
what we all was talking about. We're like, oh no, like, what are we going to do? Because that was like story of our life at that time. You know, the church had provided Christmas for us and groceries and things, you know, like we were just not getting by very well for quite a while. And so anyway, they come inside and my mom's crying and they break it to us. You know, they say, your father passed away. He took his own life. And I'll never forget that moment, man, like ever. And I didn't even know that kind of thing happened. You know, I was still so young. It was just like the idea of death and all these things. It just, I don't know, man. I don't know. Like,
well,
crazy.
Yeah. Well, as a kid, like having that idea thrust upon you where you don't even really know what death is beyond that it's been taught to you via religion or culture that like, okay, death is something you avoid. But
yeah, on
top of that, the fact that you can have the quote unquote control or power to take your own life, that's like, yeah, you can't, that input doesn't make sense to you.
And it was weird because it was kind of like I understood death a little bit because, you know, not long before that, my father's mom had passed away, and we had gone out to California for her funeral. And definitely had lived it, and like my sister's boyfriend died in a car accident. Like, so it was like going to funerals and stuff. It was like I got it. Like I understood, and especially being 11, like I got that. But just the idea of him like killing himself was like, I don't know. It was so heavy, but at the same time, I was young enough that I could still like carry on and laugh and smile. And, you know, I kind of took that role all the time as like trying to be like the funny kid in the family, trying to make people laugh and whatever, just to take the focus off what's going on, you know. But
I was just going to interject because I wanted to paint the picture too of like how many, commonly speaking, within Mormon families, you have a lot of brothers and sisters, and so how many brothers and sisters did you have?
Yeah, I mean, when it was just like the root family, there was 5 kids. I have an oldest sister, 2 older brothers, and a younger brother. So it was the 5 of us and my mom at this time, and then later, quickly, that doubled when my mom got remarried and he had 5 kids of his own, and then they had a kid together. So
right.
Before you know it, there's suddenly 11 of us. Stupid is what it is.
Yeah. So yeah, as we were mentioning earlier, obviously, like you dove into drums and kind of, you know, viewed that as therapy. Was that around the same time that I guess independent music started to introduce itself into your life? Because I mean, I'm trying to also paint a context for people because that don't really know too much about the Mormon religion. I have some experience with it in regards to the fact that it's obviously a very stifling religion from the standpoint of like, you know, they don't want you, generally speaking, interacting with sort of outside culture and outside elements. So like getting into, I always found it so interesting when, especially a band like The Used happened from where you guys came from. It was always like,
right.
Oh my God, of course I can easily see that. And obviously it's like how straight edge hardcore is such a huge thing in Salt Lake City. It's like, of course I get that. They're rebelling against everything that they were surrounded by.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because I think as a, you know, the Mormon bit, I don't even really draw many things from it anymore because, you know, I've been agnostic for years. I let them be like, you know, I may not have survived childhood quite literally if it wasn't for the Mormon church being there for my family. I certainly have nothing to say or feelings toward the organization, you know, but, I mean, they look out for one another and they look out for others, you know, it's great. And props to them for it. But at the same time, religiously speaking, I'm agnostic. I don't know anything. I'm pretty sure no one else does. And I'm at peace with that, you know,
right.
So as far as a lot of that goes, like it was an interesting timeline because, okay, there I am at 11 and I'm not really into anything. I just started skateboarding, you know, my sister's, the guy she was dating at the time, you know, gave me my first Thrasher magazine and I fell in love with that. Just like started skateboarding. My older brother rode BMX and, you know, this was the 80s and I just got way into it, and skateboarding really kind of took over my life and became kind of my outlet at that time. But then, I mean, tying back into kind of what you were saying, like living in Utah, we live in a very extreme culture here where like because this is where like the headquarters of the Mormon religion are, and you've got the highest population of, you know, like just in this county alone, you know, like there's so many Mormons and it has so much effect on the culture here that like people tend to either be like hot or cold, black or white, you know what I mean? That you're either like all in something or you are all out of it as far as possible, you know, like as much as we have like a high population of Mormons, we also have, you know, the highest rate of abused prescription drugs, you know, it's like meth capital of North America or some shit like that. You know what I mean? So we have like such extremes here where it's like people aren't just simply like drug free and sober in like a music scene or something here. They're like fucking straight edge and it's a thing, you know, like there's like you know it, you know, people are like vegans, you know, everybody like anti-Mormons. No one's just like doing the thing.
Pick a side.
Everybody makes it everyone's business, you know?
Yeah.
And it's tricky because it's like, well, what about a little bit of gray area? You know, like I feel like that's my motto of life is trying to find a gray area when you're surrounded by extremes, because it's like, no, you don't have to be like diehard religious guy and self-righteous and judgmental, but you also don't have to be anti-religion. Like, maybe just let people be and just fucking chill out. You know what I mean? Like,
there's always nuance to every situation you're in. It may be extreme when you're like 14 or 15 years old, but like as you grow older, you realize that it's like, oh yeah, there isn't blanket statements for everything. Yeah.
And it's a shame when some people don't grow up and recognize that. It just remains that way. You know, it's like I never got, like, early on, a couple of the older guys I skated with were straight edge, and that was my, like, first, you know, this is like when I was maybe 13, 14, you know, and I'm first hearing of straight edge, and it was awesome. These guys were like just these super grounded, awesome skaters that I looked up to tons just because how good they were, you know, and they were just kind of like little role models to us because there were no skaters here where I lived, and it was just like, oh, that's rad. Like, they're drug free and don't have promiscuous sex. Like, I'm drug free and I'm a virgin. Like, that makes me a straight edger, you know? Like, I know. And so there was like one hot minute in my early teens that I was like, yeah, I'm straight edge because, you know, that sounds like me. And then it was like, well, wait a minute. No, I'm not. Like, I don't care. I don't do this because it's part of like a scene or a part of a whatever. I just simply remain sober and drug free because my friends that party, I see what it's doing to them, and it's just kind of not appealing to me, you know? And there was enough going on at home that I didn't need to bring on potential trouble to myself. And, you know, I was trying to keep a grasp on life anyway. I didn't need something else like potentially fucking with my head, you know? And like, I mean, I like the analogy of like, you know, if I'm going to fucking work with a hammer every day, I don't want to wear like big, thick mittens when I do it and baby my hands. I want to fucking build some calluses and toughen up so I can handle doing that kind of shit. And as in life, like, it's like, yeah, maybe doing a little something might have helped in those hard times. Might have eased it a little bit. Might have been that crutch and that whatever, but fuck that. Like, I'd rather this shit harden me and just build those calluses inside me that, like, I can withstand whatever. Like, I don't need to rely on something else to make it easier or whatever. Like, you know, I don't need to be medicated or have some fucking crutch. Like, I just want to take it on and strengthen because this is life, and life throws shit at us. You know?
Yeah. No, I see exactly what you're saying. Independent music, like, that started to sprout up like around when you were saying like 13, 14. That's kind of when it started to become introduced to you.
Hell, it was kind of late in my life. I feel like I was like 15
before
music even started having a presence, because in our household there was really no music other than, like, you know, my dad liked the Beach Boys and my mom, you know, the Kenny Rogers, you know, but like there was really no music in my household at all. It was just through like skateboarding culture and stuff and Thrasher magazine that, like, I was stumbling over bands and music and my friends buying cassettes and then later CDs and whatever, and sharing stuff with me that I started to find music at all, you know, and around that same time was when I decided to try playing drums too, which was all a very crucial, like, huge turning point in my life, you know, to kind of fill in the gap from 11 to 15 was like within a couple months of my dad passing away, my mom remarried another guy. And it was kind of nuts because they met on a blind date, and whatever day of the week that was, 1 week later exactly was their wedding day. So,
oh man,
this is the guy that had 5 kids and my mom had 5 kids. And it was like, what the fuck are you guys thinking? You know, like, you've known each other a week and it's your wedding day. And so, you know, we're not, you know, dad's hardly fucking cold in the ground and my mom's remarrying, you know, it was just fucking crazy, the whole thing. But at the time I was just like, cool, whatever. Like, this is life. This is what happens, I guess, you know? And like, I didn't get it. Like, now I think it's fucking insane, but like back then I was just going with it, you know? And then that just introduced a whole new element because they moved us all into one house. And again, there was just no money and no anything coming in, especially to provide for fucking so many of us that, like, and then it introduced violence into our lives like I've never seen, because there was a lot of, you know, my stepsisters and stepdad, very violent and abusive toward my mom all of a sudden we have a new routine where a couple days a week you're calling the police on my stepfamily for beating up my mom, and she's in a wheelchair with
that shouldn't
two
be routine.
broken legs and shit.
Oh, it's awful.
And it was just like, I remember like fucked up days and stuff, like where, my mom's already got a broken leg from some bullshit fight, and they're in another fight, and we're getting she's crawling down the hall because she broke her other fucking leg, and he's throwing me and my brother in a room, slamming the door, and we're standing behind the door with bricks, like just waiting for him to come back in. And, like just fucked up, dark shit that thank God is in my past.
Yeah.
But the positive that came from that was I was becoming so angry, but not violent. I had never been in fights in high school, never did any of that shit, but I was punching every fucking locker and brick wall there was, and just always had bloody knuckles and shit. And I just always had this fucking scowl on my face. And I was so mad at the world, rightfully so, because all I'd known since I was 11 was fucking violence and self-destruction and anger and heartache and stuff, and
mm-hmm.
So the skateboarding wasn't quite, all my friends are starting to smoke weed and do things like that and get into hip hop and whatever. But meanwhile, I was kind of like getting more into punk and like rock, and I was staying sober because I sure as fuck didn't need anything like that adding to this mess, and so I actually stumbled over a photograph of my father when he was a teenager, and he had like this Beatles wig on that looked like long hair, and I had long hair at the time, and he fucking looked exactly like me sitting behind this drum set. And I was like, oh fuck, that's right, he was a drummer. And I started looking at all this stuff, and it was amazing. And I didn't care about music. I sure as hell didn't care about playing an instrument, like everyone in my family had music lessons, whether piano or trumpet or whatever, except for me. I was the only one that didn't have any music lessons growing up. And I was just like, I want to play drums, like I wanted to take after my dad in a way that could be positive. And that was one of the few things I could find. And so I bought a drum set, worked my fucking ass off to buy this cheap, like it was like a Vistalite Ludwig that was awesome. But I didn't realize how awesome it was. But I worked so hard to earn the money from my parents and from whatever sources I could to buy this cheap little couple $100 drum set.
Mm-hmm.
And I just started playing just when I was mad, dude. Like there'd be shit going on at home, and I'd just go lock myself in my room and just hit these drums so hard, not even caring about trying to groove and whatever. I was just like crying and screaming and hitting drums. And all of a sudden it was just like, that would take all the pain away. Like it made everything better, and it started to sound good. And it was just like, holy shit. And I could play along to these like aggressive, like hard records and start learning these songs, and it just felt good. And these bands I could identify with, and this angst, and you know what I mean? Like it was just so right. And that shit literally saved my life. I mean, I was suicidal off and on this whole period. And once I got that drum set, when I'd start feeling those feelings, rather than sit there and look around and try to get creative and see if there was anything around I could use to fucking kill myself, I'd see that drum set sitting there, and I'd just go play and have it out. And it was my best friend on earth, like that. Literally, I wouldn't be alive today if I didn't own a drum set. It was crazy.
It is one of those things where it's like you can look, like you said, because you're through it, you can look back on it and sort of identify these patterns in your life where like you were just trying to look at the positive of no matter what situation and how deep and terrible it is. You're trying to look at the positive and obviously see what tools you could use to like get through it, whether that was like you being a jokester at school, whether that was, drumming to obviously prevent you from, like you said, being creative and, attempting suicide. It is interesting to see that like, even, with all of that outside influx that like you in particular as a human, you're like, this is my core being. Like, I'm going to always try to look on the positive side, no matter what it is, So it's cool that you're able to kind of identify that subconsciously to be able to push through it.
Yeah. I mean, I felt like it all forced me to harden up quicker than maybe most, teenagers do. I don't know, but not harden up. I just think it hardened me, but luckily didn't take away my compassion and just my love for things and the beautiful things in the world, but I was certainly a very dark, angry kid, and to be able to identify with just punk rock, and even if lyrically I couldn't directly identify with the angst, you know what I mean? Like just the doing shit to just kind of hurt yourself, but in a good way. I grabbed a safety pin and shoved it through my nostril when I was like 16 or something, and like,
right.
I still have a nose pierced from that safety pin, it's like, it was just like, nah, fuck it. Like I'll do things like this because at least I'm still alive, at least it's not something that's fucking up it's not clouding my brain. It's not hurting my body in a way that I can't recover from, or, you know what I mean? It was just kind of gave me a little something to be, I don't know, if my knuckles were bloody at this point, it was because of drumming and hitting cymbals and the room, not because I was punching walls anymore. And that just felt good. It felt good to be alive, and it's nice to feel that pain and to know you're alive, but when it comes from a positive place, it feels so much better, and it just kind of took away a lot of fear in life, as well as created new fears, to be honest. But it wasn't something like, at this point, it certainly wasn't like an ambition of mine. I had no desire to be like a fucking drummer in a band kind of thing, like to go tour and to put out records. Like I didn't care at all, dude. I was hardcore. Like I'm a skater. That's what I do. This is just like my counseling sessions that are cheaper and more fulfilling,
Yeah.
And it wasn't until like I started playing shows. Like I still remember the first show I ever played was at like this house party, if you can call that a show. But I was a terrified person with like stage fright, like crippling stage fright. Like I would not go to school I'm not exaggerating, I would not go to school for 2 weeks because there was like an oral report due or something. I would ditch school for 2 fucking weeks to get out of doing like an oral report because it was so terrifying to me.
Right,
like,
right.
The worst stage fright. But so the idea of playing shows was like, hell no. That's like my biggest fear. Why the fuck would I want to do that? You know what I mean? And it's like
Totally. You're like, why would I subject myself to this? Yeah.
Yeah, and I wasn't doing this to be fucking cool. I wasn't doing it to be seen. I was doing it to survive, And it's like, so I don't need to go do this in front of people so they can watch me and judge me and, like, fuck that. That's counterproductive to what I'm doing. I'm just trying to live and not, And so the idea of it just didn't resonate with me. Like, no, why would I do that? And then the singer of my band set up this house party thing for us to play at, and I was so mad about it. I was just like, damn it. So I did it, and like, what a day that was. I mean, the memories are like flooding in, but like my buddy, one of my good friends at the time, accidentally maced me that day. It was just not my day.
Right.
Like I was getting maced by my friend, one of the worst pains I've ever felt. It was so terrible. Like, some gnarly pepper mace. And so when we were playing that show, I was so nervous. And then I remember our set, we played like 6 songs, and we played like 2 Nirvana songs. I don't know, a couple of our own and whatever. But I just remember we started out with Rape Me by Nirvana. It was our first song.
Mm-hmm.
And with that guitar and vocal or whatever, the guitar intro started, I was so nervous, dude, like undescribably nervous.
Mm-hmm.
And the second I started, that just was instantly gone. And I felt better than I had ever felt in my life. Like, not exaggerating, that was the best I'd ever felt. Yeah. And I couldn't believe it. And it was like, you may as well have shoved heroin into my arm, because I was fucking addicted and hooked and just like, oh my God, like, I need more of this, It was just like,
totally.
Like,
yeah.
I needed more shows. And it turned around quick.
What was the name of that band, that project?
We were called Strange Itch.
Okay.
Terrible names.
No, well, dude, if you had a good band name and your first band, I'd question you.
Yeah, that'd be weird, right?
I get like in this show, usually a first band comes up, and I get so mad when I talk to people or friends that are I'm just like, wait a minute. This was your first band, wasn't it? And it's like the band that they're obviously like known for. I'm just like, come on, man. You got to have a terrible band name to start things off with.
Yeah, for sure. You got to go through like some terrible, terrible stuff before you can really find a good groove. But we
Right.
did. We mastered terrible, that's for sure.
as well you should at that age. That's awesome. And so then as you started to go through high school and start to have your eye on the future, so to speak, were there any other sort of like outside activities or interests that you were into as far as career stuff was concerned? Since you obviously said that drumming was never like, oh dude, like I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna be a pro musician, whatever that means.
Yeah. No, it was funny because I was every parent and whatever, like what they dread, because I had no ambition or anything other than like what seemed unrealistic. I was certain I was going to be a pro skater. That was all that mattered, was skateboarding, and I was certain, but there was no way. Like I just wasn't that good, first of all, but it was just not happening. Like I was sponsored by like the local skate shops, and me and my little crew of friends called ourselves Team Toy, and like it was just like people knew who we were because we were the only skaters in this county at the time, and then like, of course, it was such a small community that when there were other skaters, we all met and became friends, and it was awesome, and it was like a family, but I just didn't care about growing up and what I was going to do, because honestly, I didn't see much future for myself. It's kind of like you're living from one depression low to the next and just trying to survive. So like worrying about what I was going to be when I grew up was the last thing I was worried about. It's like, I don't even know if I am going to grow up, so who gives a fuck?
Sure.
And it was really kind of a terrible way. I mean, this is all very dark. When you trace back to my my youth, it's all depressing and dark, but the great thing is the flip side to it. It's certainly contrasted itself. But yeah, so I was just certain I was going to skate. I didn't have like girlfriends, didn't have like, we were kind of losers,
Mm-hmm.
And by kind of, I mean, we were losers.
Right. Kind of like, actually losers.
Yeah, like no one liked us, kind of losers. It was funny how drumming just slipped in place of skateboarding. And in no way did it take the place in my heart at all, because I still skate regularly. I still love it so much. It's a huge part of me. But it's the place in what I saw myself doing, not as a career, but this is just like what my life is going to revolve around now, was now music, no longer skateboarding. Skateboarding was my hobby and music was my life, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, like the more, musicians I linked up with, because my band Strange Itch, we were like, I mean, we had a new member in the band every other week. I think everybody in Utah County was once in that band with me. But so
yeah,
after years of that, we finally called it quits with that name. And then I started another band called Dumb Luck that was equally terrible, really kind of the same band, just a new name. And that funneled members like regularly too, but not as much. It was a little more short-lived. But that was when I don't even like to call it a scene, but the music here was like, it was awesome, because the local shows, we'd rent like a veterans hall or something. There were no venues, but like there was one place, but they wouldn't let us play there. They kept kicking us out. I'd start a band and play one show, and they'd tell us we couldn't come back because they didn't like our scene or our genre or whatever the fuck excuse they had that time. But we were just renting out, like going to skate parks and playing shows, or renting out these veterans halls and whatever. And it was awesome because we were playing with like metal bands and funk bands and hip hop groups and everything in between, like, because there wasn't like a scene of these like different genres. There was no hardcore scene. There was no hip hop scene. It was just simply, if you played music in Utah County, you were in that scene, and we all played shows together, So it was awesome because like the unity and the shows were so rad and diverse, but very, very underground. No one gave a shit, but
right.
Through that, it kind of evolved where we were playing with a band called I'm a Stupid. That was like a little kind of pop punk band. They played like Op Ivy covers and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then in Dumb Luck, we had got this singer named Jeff, had long dreadlocks and shit. He was singing for the band, and at the end of Strange Itch, Jeff was singing for Strange Itch at the end. And then we got this guitarist that we found that was super young seeming at the time, but just like a prodigy. His name is Quinn. And so the three of us were in the band, and then the bass player left because he thought he could go do better things without us because he thought better than the three of us. So we got a different guy. And then it was crazy because that evolved, and we played with this band, I'm With Stupid, and me and Jeff like started the pit at this little show that was like 18 people. And it was so fun, man. And then we became friends with those guys. And the singer is this guy named Bert. And then he ended up starting this like hardcore straight edge band called Cobra Kai that was just fucking insane, but so good. And then all of a sudden he wasn't straight edge anymore. He was like doing meth and stuff. Like,
Right.
Utah, you know?
Totally, yeah. It swings one way or the other. Well, I think it's cool hearing the story laid out like that, because I think what you're describing is so symptomatic of most smaller towns. Because I think the struggle that a lot of people have when they don't live in whatever major metropolitan area is like this, like, I don't know like what to do or where to go. And like, that's, I mean, for most cultural standpoints, from either like, whatever, you have a kid who's 16 in some random town that's like, I want to go vegetarian. They're like, but I don't know what to do. It's like everything that's like creative has this thread that's involved where it's like, well, no, you just got to start building it yourself. And that's exactly what you guys did, where it was like, obviously, like once the Used became a thing, and, it's well documented, obviously, from kind of the point in your story on, in regards to how the Used got together and started to, make an impact. It did feel weird where it was like, okay, the Used is from, about an hour north of Salt Lake City. But then once you start, south, sorry. Yeah, you're right. South, correct. A huge difference there. But then once you started to like look into that, you were just like, oh yeah, there is this vital music scene in the surrounding areas of Salt Lake City, because it was just a bunch of local bands that just kind of built it on their own.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it was crazy too, because at that point there had never been like a signed band out of Utah, so it still seemed like, I mean, my parents literally like disowned me for wanting to be in a band. They actually did several times, but they weren't talking to me. They would like, I remember they like wrote off my sister at one point because she was letting me squat at their house in their basement, like this storage room. And they were just giving them shit that like they were only encouraging me and I was never going to make it, all this stuff. I was a high school dropout. I got to a point I just couldn't handle that anymore. And I dropped out of school. And I was just kind of all in. It was like, no, like I have no choice but to make this work because I have no backup plan. When my backup plan is to become a pro skateboarder, that's not a very good backup plan. So it was just kind of do or die at that point. And then like I was just kind of, shaping, that's how the Used came together. I named that band. We all linked up, and I mean, the rest, of course, you can read them. We have DVDs for that part.
Right.
But yeah, it was just fucking crazy. And like the way it all went down, because there was never anything like that here. It just seemed so far-fetched. The idea of like, everyone would tell us like, you'll never do that. Like, and you're from fucking Utah, like good luck with that. And it's like, why the fuck do I have to live on a coast to make good music? Like who says, like, why, like, that's fucking so stupid. And I can find example after like of things that bands broke out of that. And it's like, well, yeah, no one has in Utah yet, but they will, because we're going to, and we got, I mean, call it luck, call it whatever. But the thing that it was kind of funny, because the approach we took to that band was so much like what I've talked about with my drumming, where like, rather than chasing after trying to be a drummer and whatever and geeking out on all the rad drummers and all this shit, like I just chased the passion of it, and that's what worked for me, and like with the Used, rather than trying to emulate these bands we loved that we had been doing for so long with our previous bands, we just decided to let go and to just, if anything, let those bands influence us, but not try to emulate them, like we don't need to dress and try to sound like these, like we don't need to do that. Let's just be us, whatever that may be, and see what happens. And it was crazy because, with the guitarist in love with Radiohead at the time, and our singer in love with Ink and Dagger, and our bass player in love with Mr. Bungle, and me in love with punk bands, it was like when you mix all of that, it absolutely made sense that the Used sounded like what we sounded like.
Yeah.
You know, because we weren't trying to be any of those bands. That was just where we were coming from, you know, and just, again, chasing after the passion, not chasing after like an objective, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I see. I completely see it in the context of what you're talking about, and it's like I think that's what what resonated with me when whatever the first two Used records of being like. I mean, that's like I distinctly remember where it's like I can't remember exactly what record, but Sean Ingram from Coalesce did a guest vocal part, and it was one of those things where it was like I just remember. Whatever the punk and hardcore community was like, what the fuck? That's weird. And it's like, well, dude, they're just the Used are just weird hardcore kids from Southern Utah. Like that's just kind of it made sense to me, but it's like anyways, but like you said, it was like all this was just drawing on all of your random influences, and that's exactly what the Used sounded like, where it was like, just throw all that crap in a blender and that's what you get. You get a smoothie of all this stuff.
Here's the thing that always got me too is the reason why punk rock music, the reason why these other bands, whatever you want to call them, but like Rage Against the Machine and Nirvana and all this stuff, the reason why this aggressive, angst-filled, just fucking angry music, why that resonated with me was because it was dangerous. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't safe at all. It was, and the fact any of those bands were on like radio was just like, okay, now we're all really a part of something. There's something happening. This is a movement. You know what I mean? And to me, that's what resonated about punk rock was, the same kind of movement that started in the late 70s where like it was fucking dangerous. It was unlike anything people were doing, and it scared people and it made people hate it. It made whatever. That's what made it fucking punk, and so to me, it was like, those were the elements I fell in love with punk rock. And then in my life, it's like, all of us came from punk and hardcore bands. Every one of us that were in the Used, and we were fucking punks and hardcore kids. But we never once dared refer to the Used and what we were doing as punk, because that word takes on like this fucking like almost opposite of what it is meaning. You know what I mean? Where it's like, no, it has to have like a certain sound and a certain like look and a certain fucking package to be punk.
Right.
And to me, that contradiction made no sense, but I just left it alone because I didn't care, because I don't give a fuck about the titles. But it was just like, wait a minute. Like if four guys from fucking nowhere that they love punk and all came from playing punk rock music, write music that sounds unlike anything out there, that's dangerous and raises the bar and pushes the fucking boundaries, but we can't call that punk because it's like, well, wait a minute.
No, for sure.
Fucking stupid,
And plus, the more that you guys would have pushed against it, the more it would have been a thing for people to talk about and completely take the focus off of what you're doing musically, where it's just like, oh, but they're trying to call themselves a punk band. Fuck that. And it's like, oh God, then it would have been a whole thing that it would have been worthless.
I think it was one of those things where to let everybody else battle that out was more fun. Like laughing it off when people came up with the term screamo and trying to classify us as that. It's just like, whatever. Call it whatever the fuck you want. It makes no difference because we're not writing to cater to a genre. We're just simply fucking writing. And if what we write is a super mellow song with piano and shit like that, then that's what we want to write. And if it's something super heavy with a dude from Coalesce, that's what we want to write. Like whatever the fuck hits us that day is what we're going to do. And it was nice to have that, to be liberated from feeling like we had to cater to some kind of genre or to some kind of sound, because people identified us to nothing. You know what I mean? So we weren't pigeonholed, and it was great when we were making records and dealing with labels who knew nothing about what we were trying to do, but they got that and they let us go with it. So they were never once trying to shape us or take power away from us or anything. We were able to do everything we wanted. And it was amazing because we had no restrictions in any way, and I've never felt so free and creative as an artist as those years, because could literally do anything at all and it didn't fucking matter, and didn't matter what anybody thought. We were just having fun.
You're left to your own devices. want to fast forward a little bit to the, I think it's very interesting, like, in most of the interviews that you have done recently in regards to, or more so like when you actually first joined Rancid, where it was like, I get this juxtaposition of emotions where it was like, you were at a very low point in your life because you were just, obviously had been unceremoniously let go of playing in the Used because you weren't, quote unquote, like them, and you were on both different life paths. And then, by happenstance, you were finding solace in, talking to the guys in Rancid, hanging out with them, and then like just being completely thrown in it. Was it kind of this weird mixture of just like, oh man, I'm like, at the lowest point in my life, or maybe not lowest point in your life, but lowest point during that time, and then being thrown into this, oh shit, like we're gonna record in 2 months. Yeah. Like I'm in Rancid, I guess. Like was it hard to keep up with those emotions as they were kind of swinging back and forth so quickly?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's still hard today, almost 9 years later, or whatever it
right.
is, but like, it's weird because, Out of the Used was the lowest point of my adulthood for sure, just having worked so hard and poured so much of my heart and soul into something and have it taken away because I choose to be sober, it was just like so painful in the way that I just thought I was doing the right thing, and apparently it was the wrong thing, but then dealing with that still today, because we've come a long way, me and those guys, and everything is in the past, and we're like brothers again, and I love that because I cherish my relationship with those guys. I cherish my memories with those guys, and I can live my life with no bitterness and anger in my heart toward them, because hard shit I went through and the pain of having that happen still doesn't overweigh all the great things we were able to do, and being that first band out of Utah to be signed and to get like a gold record and shit, like, you know what I mean? It was just like, fuck it. Yeah, that sucks, but the rest of it was amazing, and so I go back and forth with that still today because I love those guys, and we've even talked about doing things together again and working together, and so like, mm-hmm. I get excited at that. That's my family. That's my roots, guys that we're all like-minded and came up in the same upbringings and similarities and stuff like that. Like, that's so special to me, Right.
You have a shared history that's almost next to impossible to like mentally shed.
Yeah. Yeah. And they compare like being in a band to a marriage, you know what I mean? And it's like, well, you can't shake off like your first wife you had a few kids with, you know what I mean? Like that's going to stay with you, like in your heart somewhere, and,
yep.
And
right.
I don't know. So yeah, I still deal with that, and I still battle with those feelings. And I love reminiscing the old times. I mean, we built a monster together, that was ours, and it created we made a ripple in music, and that's hard to do. And whether big or small or whatever you might think it was, we made a ripple, and that meant so much, And so, but then you turn it around, and Rancid had been one of my favorite punk bands forever. I was listening to Rancid literally the same time I started playing drums, and listening to Let's Go on the way to school and shit. It was
mm-hmm.
So to join that band that I loved for so long and looked up to those guys for so long, that was just a whirlwind of, and it's so hard to explain. It seriously sounds like a movie, but you would think the movie would end there, and it's and then they lived happily ever after, but it's
right.
real life, and that's not how shit works. But
yeah.
So it's been a fucking roller coaster of its own being in that band, because first of all, there's the reality of these guys that I put up on pedestals for so long, becoming my peers and learning their strengths as well as their weaknesses, and having a love-hate relationship where sometimes I want to cut their fucking heads off, and other times
right.
my favorite people on the planet. And it's to have that, it was a whole new thing where it's fuck, man, I wish I never had any heroes musically, because then you wouldn't have to lose them,
yeah. Well, no, it is weird. There definitely is. I'll relate this story, and you'll find it entertaining from the fact of I was working at a label called Century Media Records. I ended up signing and working with Sick of It All, but it was It's so weird, and I imagine you went through the same exact thing. When you're talking to, when I'm talking to the drummer Armand about like business decisions and like how this band's next record should be, and I'm just thinking in my head, I'm like, dude, what the fuck are you asking me for? Like, why? And like, I'm sure you were just like, dude, I don't know what to tell you, man. Like, I'm just here to play drums. I can't tell you how to do stuff. Like, do you realize you put out and out come the wolves? Like, I didn't do anything like that.
Yeah.
Like, you guys are unbelievable. Was it you feeling like you were playing a lot of, I wouldn't even say catch up, but just like, what did it take you a while to feel like you were their peer in some regard?
No, actually, they did a really good job of that when I first came into the band. That, like, hell, even the first day I played with them, they just did a good job of knocking down all the walls and making it feel like we were just four guys playing music we love together. You know what I mean? And it was really cool, and they really treated me like an equal right from the get-go. Other than, like, every once in a while getting, like, the kid treatment where, like, I'm quite a bit younger than these guys, and I think if anything, I get treated differently just more because my age than experience or anything like that. Because I've done some shit, So like, it's like, well, I've got a band. I started from nothing and had a lot of success from a town that's nowhere. Like, I've earned some stripes. They're different stripes than theirs, but I've earned mine and I can hang, And so they do a great job of just like all of that, you know what I mean? But it's the weird like flip sides to it. And don't get me wrong, I love what I do, like I'm so lucky. But in the Used, my style of drumming was very much my own, and it represented me and who I was and my writing and stuff. Because of the extensive history that Rancid's had and the amount of records, when we play a show, I mean, we play 35 songs a night, And
right.
It's like a best of all these records they've had over the last 20 whatever years, and so it's kind of like I'm in a cover band, but my bandmates do a really good job of impersonating the band. It's like, I fell out of my own band and I got lucky to get a gig playing Rancid songs, but those are, I mean, Brett Reed's a good friend of mine. I love that dude. And so half the time I'm just playing Brett's style of drumming and just doing what I can to make it my own while keeping it in, I have to keep it in the vein of Rancid, because that was a big thing for me when I joined. I was like, okay, this is important. Like, if this was not me, because I'm a big Rancid fan and I'm a drummer. If this was not me and I heard some other guy join Rancid as the drummer, first of all, I'd be super bummed if they just fucking overplayed like crazy and just tried to showboat everything and whatever, like, and just change the sound of the band. Like, I would be so bummed if that happened. But then I also thought I'd be super bummed if some dude comes in and is just going through the motions and just playing exactly the same as Brett and not using their own voice at all. So I was like, so I want to try to ride the line of somewhere in between where I can be me and interject my own style and just some fills and things of my own, but meanwhile not take from the integrity of the band and the sound and keep it sounding like Rancid, because that's what people fell in love with, and so I've had to kind of ride that line where it's like, yeah, like this isn't really the kind of drumming that I do on my own. Like, it's not, I can do it, but it's not the way I play. It's not the stuff I choose to play. Like, so it's weird because it's certainly, there's a job that needs to be done, and
right,
I never had that before. I just came from this totally free, play whatever, do whatever for the song. And now I'm kind of playing cover songs. So it's weird. It's
right.
It's great when we do get to do a little bit of our own. And that's where you see me you listen to the last two Rancid records I played on and helped write. And I think you can hear a difference, but it's all very much classic Rancid too,
yeah.
And that was important to me, again, to ride that line where it's like, no, I'll put my ego in check. I don't need to fucking play crazy. I don't need to do this. Again, I'll walk the walk, not just talk the talk. I'll play a super simple punk rock beat for 2.5 minutes if that's what will make the song the best. I don't need to do crazy fills and beats to like prove something. I'd rather the song be good. So
yeah,
it's really put my own approach to it all to the test. but it's also just been a little bit of it leaves me with a creative void as a drummer a lot of the time because I don't get to explore the kit like I used to, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So that ends up being saved for at home.
Right. No, well, it's cool. I'm very glad that you were able to articulate that because there's definitely elements of like, you know, when you are, I mean, obviously since you've been able to be creative with the band now and like actually contribute to their records as opposed to just being like this, you know, quote unquote hire on dude, which clearly you're more than that. But it is cool because I think that's what's so surprising about, you know, this last record. Like, I mean, straight up, like it's been a long time since I personally have really like become fully engaged in a Rancid record. And this last one in particular is exactly what you're talking about, where it's like, you know, not only does it hit on classic Rancid, but it just shows the fact that it's like, yeah, you guys are a good band and you write good songs.
Thank you.
It's interesting and it's cool that you, like I said, you were able to express yourself like that, to be like, yes, like, yeah, this isn't, you know, would I play everything like this if I were up to my own devices in my own practice room writing my own songs? Like, no, but I can do it, and I really, really like it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
like I have fun with it for sure. Like I love what I do, and to me, the performing is really what it's all about. Because I love performing so much. Which again, I hate it. I hate the stage fright because I get nervous before every show. But I have faith that the moment I hit those drums, that's going to melt away into something I love so much, which it does every time. So I love it. I love the thrill of it. I love the trying to be a showman with it. And, you know, that means standing on my drums every time I'm not playing them or whatever it takes. I just love, like, I'm a rowdy kid, you know, like I fucking love to be active. I love doing recreational stuff. I just love being a kid, you know. I'm 36. I'm the oldest child ever, but like,
right.
But so like when I play drums, I think that comes across. Like when you see me play, like I'm just rowdy with it. Like I love it. I'm screaming. I'm singing along. I'm whatever, you know, because you're seeing me in my biggest outlet ever. And whatever I can't unleash through some kind of wicked beats or whatever, I'm going to unleash in another form on that stage. You know what I mean? Just, I got to exercise those demons and keep everything in check, you know, like, so, I mean, the ugly parts when I don't get to tour as much as I'd like to, and then I'm just stuck in my head trying to battle that shit out, you know, and stay sane, you know?
Yeah. The last thing I want to hit on before I let you go, something I find so interesting, like anytime I'm preparing for these interviews and, you know, kind of trying to figure out different avenues in which to speak to people, usually obviously a Wikipedia page is always an interesting place to start off with, because sometimes it's like people have, you know, a very long and storied musical career, but they've got like nothing on Wikipedia. But then some people have like, you know, I've been in a band for 6 months and they have like, you know, 7 pages on Wikipedia. It's so interesting. You fall in this like weird in between where it's like you've got a lot of information on there, but it just seems so it's so varied. Like I was honestly, I looked at your Wikipedia page. Yeah, you should pop onto it because it's interesting because there's a lot of you know, the beginnings of of you playing drums and all that sort of stuff, and then it's like, you know, it shifts to, you know, the used portion and then the Rancid stuff, and then but then there's all this other like, you know, extraneous information, like obviously the you know, the song that you wrote for the, you know, Real Salt Lake, the Major League Soccer team.
Yeah.
But it's just it's funny. So it's like my head immediately goes to, you have people that are fans of what you do, which I think is a testament to like you not only as a person and the way that you relate to people who enjoy your drumming. Because it's like no one would go to Wikipedia to like fill in this random information about you if they didn't give a shit about like who you were as a drummer. So do you like the sort of interactions that you have with people? Do you find it that they've kind of picked you up from like either being super fans of the Used or kind of, you know, just following you throughout your career, or have they been people that have kind of like retroactively got into you through Rancid and then hop backwards?
I think it's a little bit of everything, which is so rad because it's weird because there's certainly the Used following that still follow me and like post or anywhere I show my face or whatever, all I get is them, you know, telling me how much they loved the Used back then and wish I would join them again and stuff. It's like, and then I get like the Rancid fans that are just like super supportive and stoked I came on board and they're happy with what I've done. in the band and whatever. And then like I get this like soccer like support that comes from the sports world that's completely new to me, because organized sports in general had no place in my life until 2007, you know. But now I get these like sports fans that follow me and might not know or give a shit about either band, you know. And then there's just kind of the ones that seem to follow all of the above and just kind of are with me on my journey. And it's awesome because it's such a diverse group of people. Like I couldn't ask for more, because I think I've really lucked out with the people that support me, because I think they support me because they get me and I don't know, the way I do things. And they're kind of, it's other people that are like-minded and try to be in that gray area as well with a lot of things in life, you know. Like I try not to be like shove things down people's throat, you know what I mean? But I also don't want to have no voice in if I have one, you know. I'm kind of lucky to have that opportunity where people follow me and care about the things I want to say or do. So I also want to utilize that and for the better. But so I
you don't want to waste that opportunity when you're given it.
Yeah, but I don't want to tell people what to eat. I don't want to tell people what not to do. I don't want to tell people not to fucking do anything. I don't want to be like pro and anti anything. I don't want to tell people who to vote for. I don't want to tell people what to think, you know, like I don't like that. That's not me. I mean, you know, to each their own. But the one thing I like to be outspoken about, I'm stumbling over my words because I'm having like 45 thoughts, but
that's fine.
The best things I've learned in my life and the best lessons I've learned in my life have been from examples, not from what someone has taught me. You know, like my high school art teacher, who's still a friend of mine today, that guy's taught me more in my life from his example and who he is than anything he taught me as a teacher. You know, like my parents teach me so much about what not to do a lot of the time. You know what I mean? My dad was my greatest teacher in what not to do. I look at life and I look at the examples around me, because that's all free knowledge for all of us. You can see what someone's done, the decisions they've made, and be like, okay, that could happen to me if I do those things. Is that something I want? So good and bad. Like I love like my buddy Ken Block, race car driver, used to own DC shoes and stuff. Like I love just like following that dude, listening to what he's doing, like hanging out with him, because I can learn so much, because he's just creative. He's fucking brilliant. Like does the coolest things, and I love it. And he just has fun in life, and I love it, you know? And so, and then I see from other people, like, to me, I just love those examples in my life. There's plenty of bad examples.
Yeah, no, I totally get your point. That's awesome. Yeah, no, I really, really appreciate you expanding on all these ideas and talking to me today. I definitely really enjoyed not only getting to know you, but then obviously hearing all these awesome sides to your story in your life. So I really appreciate it, Branden.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for wanting to do this with me.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Of course.
So there you go. That was Branden. And like I said, just really cool story. To have something as traumatic as suicide impact your life in such a crystal clear, vivid fashion was, you know, that's really hard. And he was able to take that adversity and be able to kind of pour it into his creative outlet, which, like he said, you know, drumming saved his life. And that I absolutely believe. There's no hyperbole behind that. Anyways, the producer, as always, is Tom Richfield. I have been Ray Harkins. I don't know why I feel the need to do that there, but I just felt like it this time. So until next week, be safe, everyone.